Imagine you are 70 years old. You have worked your entire life, saved carefully, trusted that if you did everything right, you would be safe in old age. And then, in a matter of days, everything disappears. Not gradually, not over time. Gone. That was the reality for millions of elderly Americans when the Great Depression began in 1929. When the stock market crashed, it didn't just affect wealthy investors or businessmen on Wall Street. It reached into small towns, quiet homes, and retirement savings. Banks failed by the thousands, and when a bank failed in those days, there was no protection.
No insurance, no guarantee. The money people had spent decades saving simply vanished. For younger people, losing everything was devastating. But it was not final. They could still work, still rebuild. Time was still on their side. But for the elderly, time was already gone. The savings they lost were not just money. They were security, independence, and dignity. And there was something even more dangerous. There was no safety net, no social security, no government pension for ordinary workers, no system designed to protect people in old age. Survival depended on three things: savings, family, and charity. And the Great Depression destroyed all three at once. Families tried to absorb the shock. Homes became crowded. Parents moved in with their children. Dining tables stretched to feed more mouths. Living spaces shrank. But survival came at a cost. Because the same sons and daughters expected to support their parents were often unemployed themselves. At the peak of the Depression, 1 in 4 Americans had no job. So the safety net began to tear. In many homes, a quiet tension took hold. Elderly parents, once providers, now depended on their children. They saw the strain. They noticed the smaller portions of food, the delayed purchases, the quiet sacrifices. And so, many tried to make themselves smaller, to cost less, to become invisible. They helped where they could, mending clothes, watching children, sweeping floors before anyone woke. But when there was nothing left to contribute, they simply sat, quietly, trying not to be a burden. For those without family, the situation was even harsher. There was only one official place left to go: the county poorhouse. These institutions were not designed for comfort. They were places of last resort, overcrowded, underfunded, often harsh. And for many elderly Americans, entering a poorhouse carried a deep sense of shame. It meant that every system that was supposed to protect you had failed. But even the poorhouses began to collapse under pressure. Too many people, too few resources. And so, millions were left with no formal support at all. And yet, people survived. Not because the system protected them, but because they adapted. Across the country, a different kind of economy began to emerge. An informal economy. One based not on money, but on skills. An elderly tailor repaired clothes in exchange for food. A retired teacher gave lessons for coal or bread. A craftsman fixed broken furniture for whatever a neighbor could offer. These exchanges weren't recorded anywhere. They didn't appear in official statistics, but they kept people alive. Skills that once seemed outdated suddenly became valuable again. Knowing how to grow food, how to preserve it, how to repair instead of replace. These were no longer old-fashioned abilities. They were survival tools. The kitchen garden became a lifeline. Even a small patch of land could produce enough food to make the difference between hunger and survival. Tomatoes, beans, potatoes. Simple things, but essential ones. Communities also began to shift. Neighbors helped neighbors. Churches shared what little they had. Local networks, especially in immigrant and minority communities, became powerful systems of support. For many African American communities, especially in the South, these networks were not just helpful, they were essential, because discrimination meant that access to relief programs was often limited or denied. So survival depended even more on mutual aid, on churches, on community organizations, on people looking out for one another in a world that often did not. But survival wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The Depression didn't just take money, it took identity. Many elderly men had defined their lives by their ability to provide, to save, to build something secure. And when that disappeared, so did a part of who they were. Doctors at the time began to notice something: increases in what they called melancholy and nervous conditions, what we would now recognize as depression, the loss of independence, the humiliation of needing help, the quiet fear of being a burden. These things left scars that were not always visible. And yet, there was something else, something harder to define. Not resilience in the modern sense, not optimism, but endurance, a quiet determination to continue. And over time, something began to change. The suffering of the elderly became too visible to ignore. Movements began to grow. Ordinary people started demanding something new. The idea that old age security should not depend entirely on luck, or family, or charity, that it should be guaranteed. In 1935, the United States took a major step in that direction. The Social Security Act was passed. It wasn't perfect. Many people were excluded, and payments didn't begin immediately, but it changed something fundamental. For the first time, the government accepted responsibility for protecting its citizens in old age. And over time, that system expanded, strengthened, improved. The result was transformative. In the 1930s, nearly half of elderly Americans lived in poverty. Today, that number is dramatically lower, not because hardship disappeared, but because the rules changed. The generation that lived through the Great Depression didn't leave behind wealth or monuments. They left behind something quieter, a lesson. That survival should not depend entirely on individual strength. That a society is measured, in part, by how it treats those who can no longer work. They endured, quietly, without recognition, and in doing so, they changed the future. Because of what they lived through, old age would never look the same again. They survived, not because the system protected them, but because they found ways to protect each other, and because, eventually, the world around them learned.